Hi, I'm Carol Allen, Vedic astrologer and relationship coach. And I wanted to talk today about the chart of Queen Elizabeth because no matter how you might feel about monarchy or the Queen herself or, royalty in general or the British or any of it, we all have to acknowledge this is at the end of a very amazing, long, incredibly symbolic career and role and individual that has been such a constant and such a presence, and a woman with some of the most power and wealth and influence and connections that has literally ever lived. So I thought it would be really fascinating to look at her chart. And as an astrologer, I will tell you, the first thing we do when something major happens in the world or in celebrity lives or in history is we run to our computers and we basically pull up the charts and we look at what the heck is going on and why now and what happened. So I was really blown away by her chart. I've never looked at it before, even though I've done many of the royals in the royal family. I usually do this stuff for relationship purposes. So, when Prince Charles and Diana and Camilla were going through so much drama, it was fun to look at them. When Kate and William got married, it was fun to look at them. When Meghan and Harry got married, it was fun to look at them. But the thing about this queen, of course, she was very private and she really kind of disappeared into the role. And even though she was married for 70 plus years, none of us really knows anything about that relationship. They were never all over the tabloids. I mean, they had their hiccups and they had their troubles and they had their scandals for a million years ago. But yeah, so I haven't so much looked at her. So the first thing I did is pull her up. She was born on April 21st, 1926 at 2:40 a.m. in London. And in Vedic astrology, we calculate the charts differently. So we actually have different dates for the signs. So I couldn't help but notice April 21st in Vedic astrology is an Aries. And Aries is the favorite sign of the sun. The sun in Aries is considered exalted. And the sun in astrology is considered the king of the solar system, the king of the cosmos. Why? Because of course the sun is the power source, the thing everything else revolves around. So there's all these myths and metaphors in astrology. And one of the metaphors is we actually have a royal court, a royal cabinet that the sun and the moon and the different planets all are involved in. And the sun is the king and the moon is the queen. And Jupiter's the counselors and Venus is the artisans and Mercury is the merchants and Saturn is the servants. And so the sun is the king. And it was no coincidence, I thought, that the most powerful queen with the longest reign and the longest longevity would have an exalted sun sign. But what's even more amazing is we talk about something called rulerships, ironically, of signs. Every sign has a planet that's considered in charge of that sign or the ruler of that sign. So in the sign of Aries, the ruler is the planet Mars. And on April 21st in 1926, Mars was in its most powerful sign, its sign of exaltation. So the sun in her chart is exalted and the ruler of the sun in her chart is exalted, which is essentially like saying the power source behind her and her identity in the world and her ability to be a star, because that's the other thing the sun is, right? Is a star, was exalted, right? So the sun itself was exalted and the ruling planet was exalted. That's a pretty powerful combo. Woo! Now, what's also interesting is the ruler of the sun. Mars is the ruler of the sun. It's in Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn. Saturn in her chart is in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. The ruler of Saturn in her chart is ruled by Mars, but the rule of Mars in her chart is ruled by Saturn. So they're doing something called a planetary exchange, which also is extremely powerful. So every way you slice it, there's like all this power. Well, more though than what sign a person is what are called yogas. This is more important. Yogas help to explain with so much more depth and nuance and subtlety and influence why we are the way we are. Because not every Aries is a queen, right? Not every Aries is a king. Not every Leo is an actor. Not every Cancer is a homebody. So these help to explain why you can't lump everyone in the world into 12 groups. You really can't. And so I had to laugh because all of our charts have hundreds of yogas. Yogas are the combinations formed between the planet signs and houses. And there are ancient translations to these yogas, which are in very old books. They're all about 1,500, 1,000 years old. And then there are modern translations. And so I looked hers up, and the first two that showed up in her list of yogas, one is called Berry Yoga, which also is translated to mean kettle drum yoga. And no kidding, it says, you'll crack up. It says one is lordly, of good birth, a king, famous, eminently heroic, long-lived, what? Of great experience in the affairs of the world, exempt from diseases and danger. I'd never heard of her being sick. Maybe they just kept it all under wraps, right? Possessed of much wealth, OG, lands, sons, and wives, enjoying much happiness on account of their virtuous lives. Pretty darn amazing. The next one she has is called Chandra Yoga. This one's actually really common, and it says, one becomes a king having special kinds of gems, diamonds, and jewels. Now, I wore my special gems tonight in honor of her. Of course, mine are all costume, but they were my grandmother's, and many of hers were her grandmother's. But yeah, so, you know, I could go on and on about many of her powerful yogas. But in India, when we say, hey, baby, what's your sign? Because this is the Indian system. And what we care about more than the sun is the moon. We care about the moon and the constellation of the moon. And her moon is in Cancer. She was born when the moon was in Cancer. And what's interesting about that, of course, is Cancer is the sign of family and the sign of motherhood. And in a way, she was kind of a symbolic mother of us all, right? She was kind of this constant, ever-present, beneficent, benign, right? Seemingly so, mother figure and mother, you know, mother of us all. And she herself, of course, was also a mother. She had 4 children and was a grandmother and a great grandmother. And this was very much what she was always depicted as doing, as is being with her family and being with her children and her grandchildren. Now, what's interesting is wherever the sun is in the chart, that part of the life typically is where you get a lot of your identity, because the sun is one of the things that brings like our sense of self and sense of identity. But it's also a separating factor. So in her chart, it's in the 5th house. The 5th house is associated with politics. It's also associated with OG royalty, but it's also the house of children. And because it's a separating factor, the sun here would have been partially to blame for, you know, she didn't really raise her kids. She was often separated from them, literally traveling for months at a time. She did what British wealthy aristocratic types do, which is sent her kids off to boarding school very young. I believe they started at 8. Can you imagine? Right. And then as adults, they've created a lot of trouble and heartache and scandal for her with their divorces and their sex scandals and their rebelliousness, right? And that's very, very typical. In fact, it was so funny. I had a Christmas party one year, and somebody brought a Western astrologer to my Christmas party. And Western astrology tends to get very poetic and very enamored with the sun. And so this Western astrologer was kind of holding court in my living room, talking about, you know, all the great things about the sun. And Vedic astrology loves the sun too, because of course the sun is the remover of darkness and the bringer of the light, and it's considered the great purifier. So there's all these beautiful names of the sun in Vedic astrology. And wherever it is in your chart, it's going to cause trouble. So I'm walking through my living room at my Christmas party while this woman is like kind of regaling the crowd with stories about how great the sun is. And I said, yeah, and it tends to be a separating factor, and it tends to cause, you know, disappointment or loss and letting go around whatever part of the chart it is in. And she said, well, that's crazy. My mother had 5 children and she had the sun in the 5th house. And I said, was she close to you? And she went, oh, I hate Vedic astrology. Because I guess she wasn't, right? So anyway, fun little sidebar. But so on the whole, this is a very, very powerful chart for many, many reasons. And I do believe she was good-natured. Now, of course, again, no matter how you feel about monarchy, this particular country's history of colonialism, the fact that her scepter was stolen from Africa, it was like one of the biggest diamonds in the history of the world. She does have combinations that say swallowing others' wealth. Okay. And, you know, what's also quite interesting is she has K2 in the rising sign. Now, K2 is not actually a planet. It's an eclipse point. And it tends to make a person kind of disappear, actually. When K2 is in the rising sign is the persona and the personality. And K2 eclipses that when it's in the rising sign. And it's actually part of why she was so enigmatic and so elusive. We don't really know very much about her opinions on anything, her feelings about things, and why she really disappeared into the role. That's really thanks to K2 being there. And then she, you know, was very known for her privacy, her stoicism, her commitment to duty. And one of the very simple yogas that we do is we just count how many signs do all the planets fall into. And this doesn't include the outer planets of Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. So we just count like 1, 2, 3, 4. And in her case, they all fall into 6 signs. And all my ancient books say things like, this is the most excellent person. This is the best person in their family. This person extends a helping hand to all. This person takes care of their relations, which she absolutely did, right? This person is amiable, friendly, agreeable, happy. So I think what we saw was true. She was considered to have a great sense of humor. She was considered, you know, uncomplaining, never complain, never explain, right? I think all of that was true. And I do think, based on her chart, she could be very stern and very direct and very blunt. But I also think she cared deeply for her family, deeply for her position. And that she was definitely an introvert. So it was probably hard for her to do all that she did. Every single planet in the chart is actually in an introverted position. And of course, it has all these combinations for great wealth, no surprise. Her 8th house is especially beautiful, and the 8th house is inherited wealth. The 8th house is unearned wealth, you know, the best kind, right? And now the 8th house is also longevity. And so that is in part why she lived for such a long time. The sun, of course, is also one of the main indicators of health and vitality. And an exalted sun with an exalted ruler of the sun, with a ruler of that's exchanging signs with the ruler of the sun. I mean, that is like an endless ocean of energy that would give a person. So this is why she had such good health and such good longevity. So that is Elizabeth. Now, as far as her sun, not her S-U-N, but her S-O-N, you know, the 5th house is your children, and she has an exalted planet there, and it's ruled by an exalted planet. So, of course, her children are also wealthy, and educated and royal themselves, right? And so, of course, now we have King Charles III. And I have King Charles's chart. It's so weird to say that, right? I want to say Cavalier King Charles. Is he Cavalier? Anyway, forgive me. I'm sure others have made that silly joke. But one of the things that's very interesting in terms of the timing of her passing is Charles has the moon in Aries, and an eclipse point known as Rahu, or the North Node, has been in the sign of Aries since the spring. And when you're older and you have an older mother still, the moon is the mother, and the moon is the queen of the planetary cabinet, right? Of the celestial planetary cabinet. And the moon has had Rahu eclipsing it since the spring of this year. And that's always, when I have clients and I see this, I always say, hey, watch out for your mom, like be in more touch. And if she needs anything, don't be cavalier about it. So that is quite interesting. And then the ruler of Charles's chart, his rising sign is Cancer, is the moon. And the moon was full the day that she died. And so he kind of came into his full power, interestingly enough, because he, of course, became king right away. Now, in terms of her chart, why she passed now, the moon was full the next day, rather, I should say. But in terms of her chart, what I thought was amazing is that the moon, which is the symbol of motherhood and the king and the queen, was joined by Saturn Wednesday and Thursday. And Saturn is the symbolic indicator of like loss, letting go, death, endings. So, and the moon rules her house of longevity, and it joined Saturn in the sky. So now, of course, that happened all the time. That wasn't like a once in a lifetime thing. But it was just interesting that was the day that she left her bodily realm. Now her sun, like I said, is Aries, and the North Node has been in the sign of Aries since the spring. So probably there's been health stuff going on for a while. I know it was mentioned during the Jubilee. But, I know they keep all of that extremely private. So we may never know what she died of or why she died, but she was 96, bless her heart. So now the other thing that's interesting about Charles's chart is Rahu isn't just in his moon sign, it's in his 10th house, which is career. And it's also where he has Rahu. And this is what's called the Rahu return. And this is always a time of destiny in a person's life. This only happens every 19 years, 18 to 20 years, actually. And it lasts for a year and a half. And so he has another year of this. And this is when Rahu moves into your 10th house, this is a time of greater influence and literally power over the masses, right? So I think the timing is right on schedule. It's interesting when people die, it will show up in everybody's chart in their family. So the children will have loss of the parent, the partner will have loss of the spouse, their friends will have loss of a friend. It's just amazing. So this was definitely on schedule. And a little interesting side note, Leo is the natural sign of royalty, and she didn't just die when the moon joined Saturn, but she died when Venus, the planet of like femininity and women, was in the sign of Leo as well. And Venus being in Leo is like the female queen, right? Because Leo is the sign of the king and Venus is female. And it was what's called combust. So it was being burned up by the sun. And the sun, again, is a separating influence or an indicator of sacrifice, right? And the sun itself is an indicator of loss and separation and sacrifice. So I started wondering, I wonder if a lot of royalty have died when the sun is in Leo. So I'm talking, of course, about in Vedic astrology, the sun being in Leo. So the sun is in Leo in Vedic astrology from the 16th of August to about the 15th, 16th of September, depending on the year. And so I looked up what other rulers, what other kings have died from England during this time. And there's kind of a few. Now, it's not just kings, but just in general in the royal family. In the 1900s, in the 20th century alone, there were multiple deaths in the royal family, including Lord Mountbatten, Princess Diana, of course, Prince George, the Duke of Kent, Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent, Prince William, who was a first cousin of the Queen. Never heard of him. He died in 1972. But Henry V, William the Conqueror, Richard III, James IV, all of them died in this little same window. So there you have it. Astrology is crazy. What can I tell you? I hope you've enjoyed this. I think the world has been going through so much change and transition that many of us that don't, have anything to do with England, aren't English, I've never been to England. Many of us are feeling like stunned by how strange this is. And many people are shocked by how sad they are. And again, it's just a metaphoric symbol of motherhood and constancy and stability that has left the world and left, millions and millions of subjects behind. And so we'll see what the future brings. We'll see how the family transitions. I definitely think the monarchy will continue. Prince William and Kate's son, George, has an absolutely amazing chart. I mean, I think they should literally just take the crown off of Queen Elizabeth, put it on his head, even though he's like, what is he, 7? He's going to be an amazing monarch. So let's hope that happens. And can we make him president here, please? Can we do that? Anyway, thank you for watching. This was a long one. God save us all. Good night.